Hello everyone, this is Dave from ecomcrew.com and welcome to today's video on financing your e-commerce company. Now today we're going to talk about how to get money for your company. I won't be able to lend you any money, but I can show you how and where to get some. So let's get started. Okay, first of all, you have to understand the uniqueness of e-commerce businesses when it comes to financing. E-commerce companies have highly irregular cash flows, so it can be a little harder to convince a banker to extend a loan. The cash flow for an e-com company looks something like this. You have a lot of cash in the beginning, and then you use that to buy a bunch of inventory that you have for 3 to 6 months. You quickly try to sell all of that inventory, and when you do, you have a ton of cash. Great, you say. But the problem is now you need to go make another order, and now you're cash poor again. So you have this continuous cycle of ebbs and flows where you have lots of money, you have no money, you have lots of money, you have no money, and the cycle continues and continues. Understanding these cash flow cycles of an e-com company will really help you when it comes to determining what types of financing you want to get for your company. The other thing you need to remember is that in e-commerce, cash is king. The more cash you have, the quicker you can grow. The less cash you have, the slower it's going to take you to grow. So where do you get money from? There are plenty of options out there, including bank sources of lending and non-bank sources of lending. Let's start with the second one. Some popular choices for lending outside of the big banks include PayPal, Amazon, and Shopify. These three big channels, who are also lenders, will normally give you a loan as a percentage of your sales. So if you did $1 million in sales last year, they'll give you something around $100,000 in lending. The good thing with using Amazon, PayPal, or Shopify for lending is that often you can get money very quickly and you don't have the long, tedious applications that you do with banks. The downside is that often you're going to have a really high interest rate with these lenders. It can often be 10% or more, and far more than you'll get through a bank. The other downside is that normally these sources of funding are only available for Americans. So if you're a Canadian Amazon seller or a European Amazon seller, you're out of luck. One other type of lending that's become really popular in the last couple of years is crowdfunding. So crowdfunding works like this. You post a bio of your company and yourself and your products onto a website like Kickfurther. Investors then go to this website, browse different company profiles, and decide which companies they want to invest in. It's a great way to get money, and it's an abnormal way to get money, but there are a lot of individual investors looking to lend money to people like you and me. Why do they do it? Normally through these crowdfunding websites, they can get more interest than they can through putting their money in a savings account in the bank or even in a stock or a mutual fund. With these crowdfunding websites, the more you're willing to offer as an interest rate, the more investors that you're going to get excited about your company, and therefore more lenders are going to be willing to offer you money. One other non-banking source of lending are angel investors and venture capitalists. Now, angel investors are like the guys that you see on Shark Tank. These are individual investors willing to lend you money, and I shouldn't use the word lend, they're willing to give you money in exchange for equity in your company. Venture capitalists are much the same way, except instead of an individual investor, it's a group of investors. Now, the downside with both angels and venture capitalists is that you're going to have to give up equity in your company. Do you want to do that? Most entrepreneurs don't. But the upside is that when you get money from these investors, normally you're not having to give a personal guarantee. So if your company goes bankrupt, well, that's it, and you can ride off into the sunset, and you're not going to have to sacrifice everything that you own along with the bankruptcy of your company. Finally, let's talk about one source of funding that's kind of in between banks and non-bank sources of financing, and that's your credit card. Most of us have at least 1 or 2 credit cards. You can use your credit card to fund your e-commerce company if you can get a cash advance through that credit card. Now, the great thing about a credit card is that you probably have 1 or 2, like I mentioned, and you can basically immediately get access to that funding. The downside, and you know what the downside is, interest rates on credit cards are massive, especially if you're using them for a cash advance like you will be doing for your e-com business. However, if you're paying a 20% interest rate to your credit card, but you're getting 100% return on that cash through your e-com business, it actually might make financial sense to use your credit card for a source of lending. All right, now let's finally talk about the banks. If you've been in business in e-commerce for any amount of time, you've probably gone to your bank and tried to get money, and you know how painful it is. With a bank, you have to go through long and tedious application processes just to get your loan started. And after you've spent all this time filling out that paperwork, you're not even guaranteed to get a loan. Now, the advantage with a bank, though, is that you're often going to pay very low interest rates. Believe it or not, banks actually give you a lot of money for low interest rates if they approve you, but that's the big caveat. They have to approve you. Now, when it comes to banks, typically they're going to lend you money in one of two ways. They'll give you a term loan or an operating line. A term loan is probably not what you want. With a term loan, the bank's going to give you some set amount of money. Let's say they give you $100,000 and you have to repay that over some set amount of term, typically 5 years. So if you borrowed $100,000, you pay back $20,000 per year over 5 years. That's not what you want, because like we talked about in the beginning of this video, your cash flow as an e-commerce company is highly irregular. Sometimes you need cash, sometimes you don't. So you don't want to be on the hook for this huge amount of money that you don't need all the time. So the alternative to a term loan is a line of credit. Now, the line of credit, the bank agrees to give you some maximum amount of money, let's say $100,000, but you can borrow from that $100,000 as you need it. So if you need $20,000 today, you can borrow from that line of credit. If you need $99,000 tomorrow, you can borrow $99,000 from that line of credit. If you don't need any money, then you just pay it back to that line of credit and you don't pay any interest. That's the big advantage to a line of credit. You only pay for it as you need it. Now, unfortunately, lines of credit or term loans is something the banks don't typically like giving out to these young and fledgling e-commerce companies. Why? Because we don't have a lot of collateral that we can offer to the bank in case our business doesn't do so well. Yes, you have inventory, but the bank doesn't like lending on inventory. It's really hard for a company like a bank to go seize your inventory and go resell it. We're great at reselling our inventory. Banks are not that great at selling coloring books and boat anchors. They don't want that as collateral. So with banks, yes, they offer you low interest rates, but unfortunately, it's pretty tough to get lending. All right, guys, hopefully you found that video helpful and that gave you some ideas for how you can get money for your e-commerce company. The more money you have in e-commerce, the quicker that you can grow your company and the quicker that you can go retire to some beach in Thailand and be sipping margaritas. If you found this video helpful, leave a comment in the comments section down below or come visit us on ecomcrew.com. Thanks for watching, everybody, and happy selling.